Hi, my name is Kristen and this is Kristen Craves Books. So once again, I am collabing with Becky from Bex Reads, and there are a lot of other wonderful booktubers posting videos about our favorite vampire novels today, and I cannot wait to watch them because I love a good vampire story. I actually did this video last year, so what I'm trying to do is just recommend you vampire books that I've read over the last year. There are more of them than I expected, which is great. I plan to read quite a few more in October, so maybe I will do this again in 2024. I will never get tired of recommending vampire novels to you. So I will link everybody's channels down below, the playlist that I'm sure will come out as well. So let's do this. So I know I said that I was only going to talk about the vampire books I read over the last year, but I can't in good conscience make a vampire book recommendation list without talking about my two favorites. So I will keep this brief because if you've been around, you've seen these before, but my favorite vampire book of all time is The Immortal Rules by Julie Kagawa, who is a pretty popular author, but I don't think that she gets the hype that she deserves, and this series in particular doesn't get the hype. Now, I read this 10 years ago. I think it still holds up. It feels like yesterday that I read it. It is a trilogy. There are some great morally gray characters in here. It is YA, and it follows a teenage girl who hates vampires, but one day she becomes one. There's lots of self-loathing in here. We also have a romance with a human boy, and then there's another morally gray character who's like my favorite sort of villain of all time. So I just think that this book is fantastic, and I had to hype it up one more time. And then my other favorite vampire book is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia, another book I talk about all the time, but this is a more modern take on vampires. The world building that the author has done in this book is next level. It's under 300 pages. You're gonna want to read more in this book. It just follows a vampire who is on the run, and that is all you need to know. She teams up with a human boy who is determined to protect her, and she has a large dog that is her pet, and it's great, and you have to read it. So now we can get into the new recommendations. Well, this one's not that new of a recommendation because these days, if you think of vampire novels, this is probably the one that comes to mind first besides the classics like Dracula. But speaking of Dracula, we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I finally read this in February, I think. Lives up to all the hype. It's exactly what you want it to be. It is very lyrical, but in a way that really makes sense for the tone of the story, and because it's a Dracula retelling, even though Dracula's name is never mentioned, which I think just makes this more powerful. We are following Dracula's first bride, and we are seeing how he turned her into a vampire, how she was so in love with him, and then she slowly comes to terms with the fact that she's actually in a toxic, abusive marriage, and she starts to have relationships with the other brides and some other people, and really she's writing a letter to Dracula telling her her thoughts and feelings, and it gives her a voice, and it's just so empowering. It's harrowing. It's so beautifully written. It's on the shorter side. This is the Fairy Loot edition. It's gorgeous, and it's made me a huge S.T. Gibson fan, so I'm excited to read everything else that she ever writes. I've realized over the last year that I really like fantasy romance that features vampires, and I've read a few of them that I want to just recommend that I'm sure you've heard about these two already, but they're just that good and they deserve the hype. The first one is Serpent and the Wings of Night by Clarissa Broadbent. This follows a human girl who is living in a world surrounded by vampires, so she's in danger all of the time, and she enters a competition against vampires where at the end of it you can get one wish. And she's just incredible. She has a really slow burn romance with a vampire. There's a lot of great world building and political stuff going on in the background as well. I haven't read the sequel yet, but the first book does end in kind of a cliffhanger in like a really shocking way, and I loved it. But yeah, I thought that this was a unique take on vampires, and I am not somebody who typically reads novellas in series, but something about Six Scorched Roses was really calling to me, so I decided to give it a try, and I'm so happy that I did because it is actually better, in my opinion, than Serpents and the Wings of Night, which I think is an unpopular opinion, but I liked that it was shorter. I thought it did a lot to build up the larger world of the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I loved the romance in it. It is not a slow burn as you get in the full-length novel, which makes sense because this is a novella. It follows this young girl whose sister is dying. There is a pandemic going around, and our main character is determined to find the cure, and she thinks that the vampire that lives on the outskirts of the city, who nobody interacts with or knows anything about, is the key to this cure, and she musters up the courage to go over there and talk to him about it. They make a deal where she will bring him roses over time, and every visit he will reveal more and more information, and they eventually do fall in love. They have great banter, and yeah, it was just excellent, and one that I think you shouldn't skip, because I know I'm not the only person who tends to skip novellas in larger fantasy series. This next one I just have to mention. I can't do a vampire recommendations without talking about this series, as cringy and ridiculous as it was. It is so much fun, and it's a Why Choose series. There are 2 vampire love interests in it who are actually my least favorite characters, but interesting in their own right, and that is the Mate Games. So this follows Sunday, who is a shifter who is unable to shift, and she ends up going to this boarding school where it turns out she has 4 fated mates. One is a vampire priest, which is very interesting, and he's probably my least favorite character in the whole thing, but don't tell Maggie. And the other is a vampire prince, and they have interesting dynamics with her, with each other. So yes, this was my first Why Choose, and I think it's a good place to start because it is just ridiculous and cringy. There are some hilarious one-liners, but there are some sweet moments as well, some side characters I really liked. Alec, who is not a vampire at all, he's like a Thor-like character, he's a demigod, was my favorite. But it was fun to have vampires thrown into this as well. You got everything. You got wolf shifters, vampires, demigods, witches, everything. So if you're into that, that's a fun series to check out. You can fly through those books. Highly recommend the audiobooks as well. If you're like me and you like YA kind of campy horror that tends to be sapphic, that is like a very niche genre that works for me. One that has vampires that I thought was a good time was The Lost Girls, and this follows teenage girls who have been turned into vampires by the same guy, and they've all been abandoned by him, and they come together to seek their revenge. It's like John Tucker Must Die, but with vampires, and it's hilarious, ridiculous. There is a love story that's sapphic in it as well, and it was just a good old campy time. You can listen to it in an afternoon and kind of laugh and root these girls on. It's fun. I liked it. Now, if you're into cute graphic novels, you have to read the Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch. They both feature vampires in them, and it's so comforting, cute. If you like things like The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich, which I've talked about before, if that's the kind of graphic novels you like that are just really endearing and sweet, you have to pick these graphic novels up. They are the cutest thing. It follows a main character named Garlic, who happens to be a garlic, and it's about a witch who is the only witch in this community, and she's overwhelmed because there's so many demands from her, and she's also a gardener, and she decides to bring some of her vegetables to life, and that is what Garlic is. And Garlic's best friend is Carrot, and they are so cute, and I just love it so much. And one day there's a house on the hill, and they notice that there's fire coming out of the chimney, and they think the vampire has returned, and obviously the best person to go confront the vampire is Garlic, because vampires have an aversion to Garlic, but Garlic is more quiet and scared and a little naive, but musters up the courage to do it. And the story goes on from there, and it's so sweet. And I won't tell you what the sequel's about, but the vampire is in that one as well. So if you want more cute vampire stuff, that is a good graphic novel series to turn to. And I'm actually in the middle of 2 vampire novels as we speak, because it is October. That is the time to read all the vampire books, and I'm over halfway through both of them, so I just wanted to mention them to tell you that I'm enjoying them so far. And the first book is The Vampires of El Norte. This is my first book by Elizabeth Canis, and I'm really liking it. It is definitely more slow burn. The vampires are not on the forefront of this one at all, at least not where I'm at yet. There are some vampire attacks, but that is not the point of the story, really. Actually, this is more of a love story than I ever imagined that it would be, even though the synopsis talks about these 2 characters who were separated when they were teenagers. They had this like first love going on, and she's attacked by what we presume to be a vampire. He's told that she died. He goes on the run. She's told that he abandoned her, and now as adults they've reconnected for the first time and are very confused, but they kind of have to work together in the situation. But the pining and angst is kind of next level, so if you don't like that, you might not love this, but really this is a love story at its heart. So if that sounds different for you, if you like more historical vampire stuff and maybe don't need vampires to be at the forefront of a book, they're just in the background and they're kind of just moving the plot along, and I think that it might ramp up in the second half, but so far this is a romance. That's a good one to try, at least so far. And then if you just want a vampire romance that is like a witchy romance, I am halfway through My Roommate is a Vampire. This is silly, ridiculous fun. It's everything that I love in my witchy rom-coms, but you substitute a vampire instead of a witch, which is the trend that I'm seeing a little bit more of these days, and I am here for. So it is a contemporary book with vampires. You're following a woman who's being evicted from her apartment, and she's desperately trying to find a new place to live. She sees this listing for a roommate, and it's $200 a month in a really good area of Chicago, and she thinks, I'm not even going to talk to this person because that is ridiculously low. There has to be something going on here. But she really ends up with no option. She moves in, is attracted to this man, he's a gentleman. Then she realizes that he's storing blood in his fridge. And it's great. It's hilarious. There are some great conversations in here. And yeah, I just think that it's a fun time. So if you're looking for something that maybe isn't as graphic as you might expect a vampire book to be, this is the perfect one to try. At least I can recommend it so far. So yeah, let me know what your favorite vampire book is down below. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody else's recommendations. Thanks again to Becky for putting this all together, and thank you again for your support. I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.